Hi, I'm Velvet with Quality Sewing and Vacuum, and today I'm going to show you how to use the Bernina L890. Let's go over the different parts of the L890. So starting from the top, we have our telescopic thread holder, and this holds each one of the threads you'll use for the machine. Then we have our threading ports, and each one is color-coded based on what thread you're going to be using. Then we have our tension settings for each one of our threading ports. And on the front here, we have our door. So once it's open, you have your onboard tools that you can use for your machine, and you have your threading ports. So each one corresponds to the threading ports here at the top. Then on our side here, we have our thread catcher, which can be removed if you don't want to use it. And you have your door here that opens up on the side. Then down here is where we have our threading ports for our loopers. Here is our upper looper, and then our lower looper just below that. And then we also have our looper for our cover stitch. Here on the sides is where we close the air ports, so the thread can travel through to thread our loopers. This is our setting for either overlock or roll tem. Then we have our micro thread tension settings and our width setting. Now up here at the top, we have our presser foot. The presser foot can easily be removed at the back of the ankle here with a red dial, and the foot can be taken off and can also be easily attached again with our lever at the back for the presser foot. Then we have our needle ports. The 2 here in the back are for overlock, while the 3 here in the front are for our cover and chain stitch. Now to the left of the machine, we have our release lever for our knife, for whether we want the machine to cut or not. And we can also remove the extra table that comes with it as well to reveal the free arm so we can sew in a circle. Now here on this side, we have our thread cutter. Lastly, we have the hand wheel here on the side, which moves our needles up and down. Here's our screen. So at the bottom here, we have our home button, which will take us to this page you see here. We have our question mark button, which will allow us to press on a certain button on the machine here, and it will tell us exactly what that it does. Then we have our clear button, which will clear out any of the settings that we've changed on the machine. Now we have 2 modes that we can use on this model. We have a guided mode and an expert mode. Guided mode is what I'll be showing you today. This will walk you through how to do all of the threading and settings for any stitch you would like to do. Expert mode is better if you already have familiarity with the machine and you've used it before and you feel confident in threading it yourself. On this last row here, we have our settings that we can change for the machine. So changing sound, how the screen looks, some of the various settings for your stitching. We also have a built-in manual, and this goes over stitch selection, presser foot, needle, pretty much anything the basic that you would need to know to use the model. Then the little dress form takes us to different settings that you can use for different applications. So whether it be a finely woven fabric or maybe some specific application like zippers, blind hems, things like that, this will show you exactly how to do all of those here. And last is eco mode. So this just puts the machine in a mode that makes it better for the electricity in your house. So we'll start with guided mode. And in guided mode, you can choose what type of stitch you would like to use. Over here on the side, you have the different buttons that you can operate it with. So the first menu here is going to be our overlock, cover, and combination stitch options. So we'll start by going into overlock. Now there's different ways you can show these stitches here. You can either show them just by pictures, but you can also show them with words, which is how I prefer to see it. Now, to scroll through this screen here, you're going to use the side right next to the icons to scroll. We're going to start with a 4-thread overlock with integrated safety seam. So our first step, it lets us know that it wants us to lift the presser foot and scroll to the next step. So our presser foot is already in the up position. No unthreading is required. Now it tells us to attach presser foot C11. So I like to check what foot that I'm using. Right here at the back of the foot, it will tell you what number it is. Then here on the screen, it tells you to adjust your presser foot pressure. The presser foot pressure is located up here at the top, and we'll have it set at 4. Next, it tells us to insert our needles in the positions shown. So our needles are going to be in our right needle and left needle positions. If we look down here, you'll notice that we already have our needles in the correct positions, but to show you how to take them in and out, you will use your onboard screwdriver that comes with the machine, and you will loosen the screw for the corresponding needle, and it can be removed. It's recommended to change your needles every 8 to 10 hours of sewing or every 2 to 3 projects. Next, we need to activate our knife. Here on the left side, we have the lever that activates our knife. But if we look to the right of our foot here, I can tell that my knife is already in the up position. Next, it tells us to adjust the cutting width. The width will be set to 6. Your cutting width is located here on the bottom of the machine. Now, I'll attach the knife cover insert. The knife cover insert is located right here in the front and can be easily removed from the machine. And if you are doing cover stitch, you will use the cover stitch plate instead. Now I'm going to activate my upper looper. So the upper looper is already in the up position, and I can tell because it is currently going across my foot here. But if it is not in the upper position, feel free to watch the videos that they give you for just about every step to tell you how to do each of these parts. Now we're going to hook out the upper looper converter. The upper looper converter is a little hook here located on the top of the upper looper, and it is flipped in when you are doing certain specialty styles of stitching. When not in use, it will be flipped over to the right. Now we're going to set our rolled hem selection lever to the position O for overlock. This is located right here to the right of the foot, and we are already set for overlock. Then we're going to adjust the micro thread tension control. This is located just below the overlock and rolled hem settings, and this will be set to 0. Now it tells us to thread the following thread paths. So we will be threading our right needle, our left needle, our upper looper, and our lower looper for a 4 thread. Now this machine is great because you do not have to thread in a specific order like on some sergers. You can thread in whatever order is easiest for you. I prefer to work from right to left. If I'm unsure how to thread one of the ports, I can always press those handy videos and they'll walk you through exactly how to do each step. So our first step for threading our loopers is by closing our air ports. To close the air ports, you will start by using this dial here and switching it over to the side. Then you will use your presser foot here on the floor. And as you press it, the air ports down here will activate. Once they are activated, we can start our threading process. So I'm going to start by grabbing my orange thread here in the back and placing it into the telescopic thread holder here from back to front. I will then come down to my threading ports, labeled red. I'll start by placing it here in the little tension clicker at the back and then traveling down the front of the machine. Next, I pull the thread long enough that it meets my lap, and I place just a small amount of thread into the corresponding port. You really only need a little bit on this model. Next, to thread it, I'm going to press down on the pedal on the floor. And the thread shoots through to the side where your loopers are located. Next, I take the loose thread and I throw it to the back of the machine just so it's out of my way. Our next looper is labeled in blue, so I will go up here and grab my blue thread. Once again, I'm going from back to front for my threading in my telescopic thread holder. Travel down our first port here, and then pull the thread long enough that it meets your lap. Now to activate the air, you're just going to press on your pedal. And your thread shoots off here to the left. Now I can go ahead and thread my needles. So starting with my first needle here, which is my right needle, labeled in green, I'm going to grab my thread here at the back, and it goes back to front into your telescopic thread holder, back down into that channel. Now we'll take your thread and we're going to travel to the left of the machine here. You will place the thread underneath the hook that corresponds with the color that you are working on, so everything that I will follow will be green. There's going to be 3 different sections where you can place your threads. The bottom 2 are for your overlock, while the top 3 are for your cover stitch. So I will just follow this green one here at the bottom. Now I will place the thread here in the farthest port, and then the thread will go behind this little hook here up close to my needles. Next, I can thread my needles, and there's 2 ways to do that. I can do it by hand from front to back, or I can use the onboard tools and use the needle threader. Last, I'm going to thread my left needle. And it's pretty much the same process as your right needle. I'm going to grab my yellow thread up here, travel down this first port, and go across the machine to the left. And I'm going to place the thread in anything that is yellow. So once again, I'm using just the single yellow section. My last step is I'm going to place it in this second to last section here, and then place it into the same hook that my white thread is in. And I can thread my left needle. Once finished with your threading, you'll press the green check mark, and a video will play to show you how to open up your air ports to then begin serging. Go ahead and close your doors, and then you're ready to serge. So on our screen here, we have our different settings for the tension for each one of our threads. These are set automatically based on what stitch you chose to use, but you can change them if you would like. To change them, you can either use the plus and minus indicated on the front of the machine, or you can use the buttons here on the screen. So when I press on it, it's going to give you a series of dials to change each one of our tension settings. Next, here on the left, we have an indication for whether you want your needle to stay up or to stay down when you stop sewing. So this section here shows us our stitch length and our differential feed. These can be changed however you would like, but they are set automatically for you when you choose your stitch. They can be changed with either the sliding wheel or with the plus and minus. Anytime you're outside of the recommended stitch settings, the selection here will turn yellow. You can always turn it back to its default by pressing the button again, and it turns back to normal. Our differential feed here on the side dictates how much fabric is being pulled through the machine. Normally, when you're working on most fabrics, it will be set to 1. But depending on the type of fabric you're sewing on, usually stretch fabrics, you may want to change your differential feed settings. This button down here gives you an explanation on how the stitch forms. You can always reference this if you're unsure on how the stitch is supposed to look. This gives you an idea of how the stitch should be formed. This button here on the side with the speed control controls how fast your machine is going, and you can set this wherever you feel comfortable. Let's start serging. So I'm taking a piece of cotton fabric and I'm going to fold it in half. And I'll place it underneath my presser foot. If you notice, the feed dogs on a serger come out really far. So that means I can actually start serging with the presser foot down if I would like. You always want to place your fabric before the beginning of the blade, not after the needles. Otherwise, the blade won't catch the edge of the fabric. Now I'll just press down on my presser foot and start to serge. On a serger, I can serge off of a piece of fabric as long as I want. Then I'll use the thread cutter here on the side to pull my thread into. Next, I'll show you how you can go around corners without taking the fabric out at every single step. You'll start by placing your fabric underneath the presser foot. And at this point, you're only going to allow the fabric to be trimmed off just a bit. Once you do your next side, you will not be able to trim off a bunch of fabric if you did it a lot the first time. I will now serge to the end of the fabric here, just where the needles are out the very edge. If you feel like the machine's going to go too fast for you, that's where you can go in and change your speed, or you can use your hand wheel on the side, always moving the needles towards yourself, and I can do a hand stitch just to finish that off. Next, when I'm ready to turn the fabric, I will lift my presser foot up. I will grab my fabric and I will gently pull back from the machine. On this model, you only have to do it very slightly. Now I'll take my fabric here and I'm going to turn it and reposition it so the needles start at the very beginning edge. And now I'll serge again. Once again, once I'm ready to go to the next side, I'll either serge right up to the very edge where the needles are just out the edge, or I can use my hand wheel on the side to kind of hand stitch it. I'll lift my presser foot, pull my fabric back, and then turn it to reposition it right back in front of the needles. One more time here, I'll pull the fabric backwards, reposition it in front of my needles, and then finish with the very last side. At this point, I can let the blade cut off this extra tail here. And that's how you serge around the sides. So you may want to use this technique when going around pattern pieces that you'll be attaching together, or to finish off all of the sides very easily without having a bunch of extra tails hanging off each side that you have to tie off. Next, I'll show you how to do an outer curve. So I'll take my denim here and I'm going to fold it in half. And then from the folded edge, I'll use my scissors to cut a half circle. Don't worry if your circle's not perfect, you're gonna serge around it anyway. Now I'll place my circle underneath the presser foot. Now in this case, I do want my fabric edge to be pretty close to the needles. That way it catches that rounded edge. So I'm gonna lift my presser foot here, place my fabric underneath, still in a position where the blade can catch the edge of my fabric. Serging around circles can be a little tricky because the machine is designed to go straight. So you usually have to help the fabric along a bit to make sure that it gets that curved edge. At this point, I'm really watching my needles to make sure that they are hitting the edge of my fabric. My right hand is acting as my guide to help guide the fabric through, and then my left hand is acting as a bit of leverage. So I put a small amount of pressure on the fabric here to help turn it in a circle. Now once I get back to where I began, I want to let it cut off this previous tail and bit of fabric that's still hanging on, and I'm going to allow the machine to stitch over some of the previous stitches that I already made. One thing I sometimes like to do is if I'm worried that the blade is going to continue to cut the fabric when I no longer want it to, I can put the blade in the down position, and that's located, if you remember, here on the left side of the machine. And here we serged around a circle. So the reason I may want to go around a circle is if I'm trying to do specialty techniques like serger crochet. You can actually use specialty threads in our loopers to create a fun decorative look to make things like serger flowers, add embellishment to projects, or anything you can think of. Let's stitch an inner curve. So I'm going to take this piece of knit fabric and I'm going to fold it in half. And I will now use my scissors to cut half of a neckline. So when I open it up, I have a full scoop neck t-shirt. So from the cut edge of our fabric here, I'm going to cut here at an angle. Once again, this doesn't need to be perfect. The serger is going to do all of that cutting for you. Here's my little t-shirt. Next, I'm going to take a piece of ribbing. Ribbing is typically used on the edges of cuffs and sweatpants, baby bibs, things like that to add a little bit of tightness around them. And I'll take this piece and fold it in half. And I'm going to line my ribbing up against the cut edge of my t-shirt here. So it should look something like this. So the reason that your ribbing is cut much shorter is because you are actually going to stretch the ribbing to meet up with the neckline of our t-shirt. Ribbing is typically smaller than anything you're going to be attaching it to, and that way it will actually cause that tightness around your garment or project. Now with something like ribbing and knit fabric, it tends to be a little bit more on the slippery side, so I like to lift my presser foot up and place just a bit of the fabric underneath so those feed dogs have an easier time grabbing it. Next, I'm going to go ahead and start serging, and I only want to serge a little bit. I want to get the stitches just on the very edge of the fabric, so then I can go in and I can stretch my ribbing to meet up with the edge of my t-shirt. Once I've done that, I will grab my ribbing here and I will stretch this to line up as close as I can get to my t-shirt. Mind you, we don't really have a real t-shirt here, so it'll just be close enough as much as that I can stretch it. And I'm going to do my best to try and keep the neckline of the t-shirt that I've cut straight so it stays right up against my ribbing. You don't want to keep it curved, otherwise you'll end up cutting into it and you'll lose part of your t-shirt. If at any moment you need to stop to adjust, feel free. And there we have our t-shirt neckline. So this here would be the inside of your project, and this would be the outside. You get a beautiful finish on both sides. Let's talk a little bit about differential feed. Now, differential feed can be very handy when you're working with stretch fabrics or things that have a tendency to be a little difficult to work with. It also works really well with things that have a high pile to them, like fleece. First, I'm going to show you how to use the differential feed by using one side as your control side, and the other side will be used with differential. You'll notice that when you just serge on a piece of fleece fabric normally, you get a little bit of a pull on the side, or sometimes you can even get a little bit of a wave. If you want to avoid those problems from happening, that's where differential feed comes in. So here on the left side of our screen, we have our settings for both length and differential. So we're going to just change the differential at this moment, and we're going to bump it up just a little bit higher. When you go up to a higher number, the differential feed will cause the fabric to not stretch. When you go to a lower number, the fabric will stretch out more. I'm going to raise this to about 1.4. Now flipping our fabric to the other side, I'm going to go ahead and serge on this edge. Now the difference you may get on this is just dependent on the fabric that you're using, and it may be very subtle, but this little bit of difference here that prevents that puckering and that waving of the fabric can make or break a project. Really what it's doing is it kind of like makes the stitches a little bit further apart, and it sort of takes the fabric and kind of pushes it back in. So if you were going to make something like a fleece blanket with multiple patches, you don't want to change the size of it too drastically because then you'll have a whole wonky quilt. This way, it makes it a lot easier for you to keep everything the same size. This here is a long strip of cotton fabric, and you can gather with your differential feed. So coming back into our stitch length and differential feed settings, I'm going to adjust my differential feed to the highest number that it will go. Then I'm going to adjust my stitch length as long as it will go. Now I'll take my strip of fabric, place it underneath the foot, and serge. This will move pretty fast because now your stitch length is very long. And here you've created a gather. Now let's talk about some other stitches your machine is capable of. Besides our 4-thread, we can also do 3 and 2-thread serging. So let's start with 3. So pressing this icon here on the side brings us back into our stitch options. We're going to go ahead and press Overlock, and then we're going to go ahead and choose our 3-thread option. Now, if you've ever used a serger before, you'll know that there are different options of 3 threads that you can do. You can do a 3-thread wide, and you can also do a 3-thread narrow. We're going to start with a 3-thread narrow because that will easily transition us into our next step. So following our guided mode, the machine will let us know that it wants the foot in the up position again. And then we're going to unthread our following path here. So the thread that we'll get rid of here is our left needle thread. We'll start by going and cutting across here at the top. And then once we rethread, the machine will be able to pull the thread out the rest of the way. Next, you'll make sure that you have your C11 presser foot attached, which I do. That is the one you will use for all of your serging. And then here on the side, it tells us to adjust our presser foot pressure to 4, and that's our knob up here at the top. And we already have it set to 4. Next, you want to take out your left needle. Open the door here on the front, grab that onboard tool. I'm going to place the needles in their highest position, and then I can remove my left needle. If you have a hard time getting out the needle because the thread is still in there, because the presser foot is in the up position, you can easily remove that thread by pulling it out. All right, for our next step, we need to activate the knife. Our knife is already activated from using it for our 4th thread, but if it is not, it's located here on the left side. Now we must adjust our cutting width. The cutting width will be set to 6, which is located down here on the front of the machine. Then we'll attach our knife cover insert, which is the cover that we already have here on the front of the machine. Then you will activate your upper looper. You can remove your thread tray, open your doors, and that upper looper is right here. A lot of these steps when it comes to your serger, they will all be very similar, and a lot of these things will already be set on the machine if you've been using it previously in the serger mode. Next, you're going to make sure you hook out the upper looper converter. That is that little flipper here on the side, and it will be out. Next, you're going to set your rolled hem selection lever to O for overlock, which is located right here on the inside of the machine. Then we're going to adjust our micro thread tension, which is going to be right down here at the bottom, already set to 0. Lastly, you'll make sure that all of these ports are threaded. So our lower looper, upper looper, and right needle. Because we already did our 4th thread, all of these are already done for us. So it's very, very simple to go from one type of threading to another. Once you're ready, go ahead and press the green check mark, and you're ready to serge. You'll notice that all of your settings are back to normal because you've changed what type of threading that you're going to be doing. So now I'll take another piece of cotton fabric, fold this in half, position it underneath the foot, make sure your foot is in the down position, and then I'll go ahead and serge. And this is your 3-thread narrow. So the difference between your 3-thread narrow and your 3-thread wide is based on which needle you choose to use. The narrow uses the right needle, while the wide uses the left, and it will change the appearance of your stitch. This is really the only way that you can truly change the width of your stitch on a serger. The reason you may want to use a 4-thread versus a 3-thread depends on how much thread you want to use and also how many needles you want to put into the machine. So a 4-thread is the strongest stitch that your serger can offer, and a 3-thread is another great option that you can use, but it uses less thread and less needles to create the stitch. So it really depends on the thickness and durability that you're looking for in your fabric and your projects. So now let's go over our rolled hem. You're going to press the stitch icon in the upper right-hand corner. And from here, the machine will actually ask you if you'd like to save the stitch. You can choose to save it with the settings that you have, or you can choose to just go back into your regular stitches. So going back into our overlock menu, we're going to go ahead and scroll down till we get to our 3-thread rolled hem. So once again, the machine tells us that we are going to lift our presser foot up. No unthreading is currently required because we're already set up for our 3 threads. It'll tell us to attach our presser foot, which we already have. Adjust the presser foot pressure, which is at 4, still the same. And it will tell us to insert our needles in the position shown here. So that's just our right needle, and we already have that in. Then we will activate our knife with the lever here on the side. That's already up. And our cutting width is going to be changed. The cutting width is down here in the front, and this will be adjusted to 5.5. Next, we'll make sure that we have the knife cover insert attached, which we do, and we'll make sure our upper looper is activated. And that's our knob right here. Then we'll make sure that the upper looper, the hook, is currently out, which it is. And then our rolled hem selection lever is now going to be set to R. If you are not threaded, you will thread this for your right needle, your upper looper, and your lower looper. Now we can go ahead and start our rolled hem. So as you see up here at the top, it sets all of the tension settings for you. You can always change them if you would like, but this will work just fine for us. Taking a piece of cotton fabric again, we are now going to just serge along one long edge without folding the fabric. And here is our rolled hem. So rolled hems are typically used as a decorative style of hemming. They look really beautiful on the edges of skirts, dresses, curtains, napkins, tablecloths, and really anything else you can think of. Rolled hems typically only work on thin fabrics. They cannot be used on anything heavy like denim or canvas. Thank you so much for joining me for Class 1. I hope this helps you learn some of the basics of your new Bernina L890. If you're looking for more classes, feel free to check out Part 2, where we go over more of the advanced settings and the cover hem features on your Bernina L890. Make sure you subscribe to our channel for more videos just like this. And if you live in Washington State, come visit us at one of our locations.